Bienvenidos a todos, a todas. Es un gusto estar con ustedes esta tarde de otoño en Argentina. Este ciclo de charlas para alumni de la Universidad Católica que está cumpliendo esta semana 65 años desde su comienzo. Y estamos muy contentos de poder festejarlo de esta forma y junto a ustedes. Desde la Coordinación de Desarrollo y el área de graduados, hace muchos años que venimos trabajando para ofrecer oportunidades de reencuentro y organizamos con este fin también eventos de 25, 50 aniversario de graduación, que con la pandemia hemos tenido que suspender. Sin embargo, seguimos enviando mensajes a cada uno de nuestros graduados y que estamos ansiosos de retomar, porque realmente son encuentros muy cálidos, donde también, además de entre colegas, se encuentran entre amigos. Y queremos también que sepan que cuentan con un 20% de descuentos en todos los cursos de posgrado, de formación continua que ofrece la universidad, y muchos otros beneficios que tenemos para ustedes, como el acceso a biblioteca. Así que cualquier duda en relación a esto, siempre pueden escribirnos, van a encontrar todos nuestros datos de contacto en la web, si no, Pablo los va poniendo en el chat. El área de graduados de la universidad es para ustedes y queremos invitarlos a ser parte, acercando ideas, propuestas, o incluso trabajando en forma voluntaria con nosotros para poner en marcha iniciativas conjuntas. Gracias a todos por sumarse. Un gusto compartir con Shermin esta tarde. Muchas gracias, Shermin, por darnos un regalo de tu tiempo. Sabemos que estás muy ocupada y que de verdad apreciamos muchísimo el que compartas con nosotros este ciclo de charlas para graduados. Te dejo entonces en manos de Martín, que va a hacer tu presentación.
Okay.
Buenas tardes a todos, ¿cómo les va? Gracias por participar de este espacio. Como bien decía Leti, es un espacio en el que la universidad está queriendo compartir con todos un conjunto de charlas en ánimo a festejar o celebrar distintos eventos que van coincidiendo en este año para con la universidad y sus graduados. Un poco en honor a darle la palabra lo antes posible a Shermin, voy a intentar presentarla, pero quiero decirles ya que cualquier cosa que pueda decir no va a terminar de hacer honor a lo que Shermin representa para todo este nuevo ecosistema que es la criptoeconomía y la token economy, ¿sí? Así que ella se va a poder presentar sola luego después cuando la escuchen hablar, ¿sí? Sacarán sus propias conclusiones. Lo que sí les puedo decir es que, en primer lugar, Shermin es autora de el libro Token Economy, ¿sí? El cual tiene múltiples ediciones, ha sido investigadora y directora en el pasado del Instituto de Criptoeconomía de la Universidad de Viena, ¿sí? Y al mismo tiempo se ha desenvuelto o se desempeña al día de hoy, y lo ha hecho en el pasado también, como consultora especialista de proyectos nativos a través de esta tecnología, ¿sí? Ha participado de proyectos muy relevantes en la historia evolutiva de esta tecnología fundacional, como es la tecnología de blockchain, ¿sí? Y todo lo que implica la tokenización o los procesos de tokenización. Así que nadie mejor que ella para iluminarnos respecto de qué se trata esto, ¿sí? Desde lo personal, tan solo puedo agradecerle por compartir su tiempo con nosotros, ¿sí? Y mi percepción, que se las transmito a todos, es que es una gran fuente de inspiración para animarnos a pensar de una forma distinta de cómo hacemos las cosas o estamos acostumbrados tradicionalmente a hacer las cosas, ¿sí? Así que bueno, los dejo en excelentes manos.
And I think it's time for me to take over.
Time for you.
Role. Okay. I'm very shy to speak Spanish. I actually speak Spanish, but yeah, it's really an honor to be invited. So Martin froze, but the honor is on my side to be able to share this knowledge with you. And from what I understand, there might be some interest maybe to also create a research institute on this topic at your university. So I want to, at the end, also share some experience of building this research institute around those topics. But yes, let's start. I will share my screen. And enter full screen. So from what I understand, there's quite a diverse audience today. So some of you might already be acquainted with blockchain and applications, Web3 and tokens in specific, but others might be very new to the topic or quite new to the topic. So I will try to give a presentation over the next 40 minutes that is wide and where I can also give an introduction to the people who are new to the topic. So what is the token economy and why did I write a book about it? I think in the context of the evolution of the internet, if we think of the history of the internet, the web, kind of the first generation internet, revolutionized information. We didn't call it Web 1 back then because it was kind of the internet for us. What happened in the early 90s, even though the internet existed before, was that we all of a sudden had kind of technology which allowed us to create visually appealing websites with a few lines of code based on the programming language or markup language HTML. And what happened was that because of this easy language to create visual websites that would connect kind of information web pages through links, the internet that had existed before became much more user-friendly. And this brought us the information revolution, or the information economy. Like, it became really cheap to share information and to search information over the web. And the motto was "Hello World." It was easy for people to create a new website, but very often they didn't know what to write on their website. So for those who might remember the 90s, very often you would have websites that only said "Hello World." And it took us maybe 10 years until we understood as a society how we could what we could meaningfully do with websites. The first websites were search engines. The first functional websites were either had content, information, and the first more complex websites were search engines, websites that allowed us to find information. And but as the internet matured, we moved toward the Web 2, and the Web 2 wasn't a technological revolution. It was kind of an evolution. It made the front end nicer and easier kind of to navigate and easier to create, and it revolutionized interactions. And what it was a front-end revolution, and what it brought was the platform economy. It brought us kind of peer-to-peer knowledge creation, platforms with knowledge creation like Wikipedia, platforms for e-commerce such as Amazon and eBay and everything that followed, or social media platforms that connected people and allowed us to communicate in completely new forms than it was before, possible before. So while the Web 2 made it easier for us to interact over these platforms are controlled by one entity, the company or the institution, even if it's an NGO, or the university website. In the end, it's an institution that manages and controls the platform, that controls all the data, and that controls all the rules of what happens and how the people can interact on this platform. And in this sense, this is the big step, next step in the history of the internet, is kind of this, what we call the Web 3. And the Web 3, the backbone of the Web 3 are blockchain networks. We will talk about that later. And the Web 3 is a backend revolution. It doesn't change how we use the internet. We will be using computers and mobile phones and apps and browsers to connect with the internet. So on the visual side, it will stay the same, but in the back end, data is collectively managed. And we will have a look at this. And on the front end, kind of the killer application, it's not the website, but it's the token. So think of, Web3 as a backend revolution powered by blockchain networks, and the main application of these Web3 networks are the various types of tokens that we now collectively manage with those blockchain networks and other Web3 networks. So what is the difference between the Web2, the first generation internet, second generation internet, and the Web3? On the front end, as I said, the front end will stay the same. The only difference in the front end is what you see on the right-hand side is the wallet. It's a piece kind of in kind of the application running on your computer or on your mobile phone has a module called the wallet. It's kind of the blockchain client that communicates with blockchain networks in the backend. And as opposed to the Web2 data was centrally managed by servers or computers that were managed by companies such as Facebook, Google, Amazon, YouTube, your bank, your university, whoever manages a website. In the Web3, data is collectively managed, and the status of who did what and when, who owned how many tokens and when, and did what and when, is collectively managed by the ledger of transactions, by a public network that collectively manages the state of who did what and when. But the Web3 is much more than just blockchain networks and other distributed ledgers. The Web3 needs other peer-to-peer networks like peer-to-peer databases and peer-to-peer metadatabases, identity-based identity management systems, peer-to-peer file sharing systems to collectively kind of manage big files of data such as YouTube. So in the back end, we have the peer-to-peer cloud. And that's the big difference to the centralized cloud, where data is managed by one entity and we have no control over what happens on the servers of these entities. In the peer-to-peer cloud, all transactions are transparent to everyone and transactions are collectively managed. So in the Web2, we have two important components in the Web3. On the front end, the key kind of component, key infrastructural component on the user side is the wallet, which is part of the decentralized application. That's the only difference to the Web2. And that wallet communicates in the back end with a blockchain network, which needs other peer-to-peer networks. And the full nodes, the computers of this blockchain networks that manage the ledger of transaction, the kind of list of who did what and when in an encrypted way, these full nodes are the key infrastructural component in the backend. So I think from a technical point of view today, we won't go any further, but it's very important to understand these basic principles of the Web3 and why it's different to the Web2. But we want to focus on tokens and tokens as the main application of this new internet. And but tokens in the end are not a new thing. The English language knows the word token is a very generic term, and we've known asset tokens for a long time. I think there are some people who didn't deactivate their microphone. It would help to deactivate your microphone because I can hear some noises. Tokens are not a new thing. We've had different types of tokens in the analog world and in the digital world for a long time. Asset tokens in forms of shells and beans have been used for millennia to exchange value. Access right tokens in the form of tickets, ID card, membership cards. So these access right tokens can be ID cards, but access rights can also be managed by computers. Okay, I think there is some, I think the, maybe the moderator needs to deactivate the sound of the other participants. That would be great. Thank you. Okay, so we've known tokens. I mute myself. Ooh. All right. I think we have it now. I'm unmuted again. All right. So we've also known tokens from in computer science. Tokens manage access rights, and they can manifest in the real world as a kind of QR code. You use it every day, a QR code to enter a concert or maybe board a plane. These are kind of analog representations of kind of computing tokens if you print them out. And we've used incentive tokens in behavioral economics or behavioral psychology for incentivizing people for actions in a system, whether it's reward miles or other loyalty programs, or for behavioral change in social contexts. So incentive tokens are not a new thing now. But what is new is that we have this new technology, this new internet, that allows us to collectively manage tokens in a completely novel way. So a Web3 token can represent any type of token that I mentioned before. And these Web3 tokens think of them as rights management tools. These Web3 tokens are represented by a smart contract. It's like a computer code that is collectively managed by all full nodes in a distributed ledger network or blockchain network. These tokens can represent a set of different rights. Ownership rights, access rights, management rights, voting rights are one of the most important kind of rights that can be managed. And the user needs a wallet, the blockchain client. It's a piece of software that connects with this distributed ledger network to authenticate themselves and to manage their tokens. And these tokens, as I said, don't only manage ownership. Mostly we nowadays think of tokens as ownership tokens, as asset tokens, but as I said, they can, and that's really important to understand, manage many other different things such as access rights, voting rights, and all kinds of custodial or management rights. So as I said, very important to understand, the user needs a wallet, and this wallet provides identification. And these blockchain wallets combine different functions of keys, functions of money, functions of identity cards, or other types of investment assets such as securities, etc. Anything can be really tokenized, and we will look at that in a minute. So this wallet mostly runs either on your mobile phone. It can manage assets, but it can also manage, as one of these screenshots, it's the YOLOCOM, the black one on the very right. It's actually an identity wallet that manages your credentials, your driver's license, the fact like your address and everything, but it's managed in a self-sovereign way. The data is collectively verified, but the private data is only in your wallet. So think of these wallets as kind of computer programs, a computer program or like an application that manages all your keys, your addresses, your identity related data, and your assets. Now, before we move on to analyzing the different types of tokens, I think it's also important to understand a little bit more what type of wallets we have. The most kind of convenient type of wallet are software wallets, but there are also hardware wallets that exist where kind of you manage your tokens when you authenticate through a dedicated piece of hardware, rather than using a software on your mobile phone or a hosted software, maybe on the server of your exchange. And you can also, if the wallet manages assets, you can also use very old school a paper wallet. But I think on a legal side, it's very important, like the question between custodial wallets and non-custodial wallets. The whole idea of Bitcoin, and Bitcoin was the first blockchain network. It was the first, what we now call Web3 network. The whole idea of Bitcoin was to be self-sovereign in your asset management. And kind of non-custodial wallets is a very funny name that lawmakers nowadays give to blockchain wallets, but this should be the standard from a blockchain point of view. From a Bitcoin point of view, the idea is that you have the option, at least, to sovereignly manage your assets without having to trust an entity such as a bank or other financial institution. But of course, this means that you're also kind of responsible for the losses of backing up your wallet. And if you don't do that well, you lose all your funds, which is why more and more people are using custodial solutions, third-party solutions where they rely on kind of an exchange or a bank managing the wallet for them. So, yeah. That's it for the technical introduction. Let's move on into the different types of tokens, because this is also the most kind of exciting part. As I said before, nowadays, especially in the media, mass media, the biggest focus is on what I call asset tokens. Tokens that can represent currencies. This is why we call them cryptocurrencies. Tokens that represent commodities, securities, real estate tokens, shares of a company. These tokens can be represented to represent a piece of art, but an asset could also be energy. Kilowatt hour can be represented by a token, and we will look at these examples very quickly in the following slides. Tokens can also represent ownership of media, such as a song, movie, or a book. So right now we're in this phase where we're moving. First, we were talking about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, things that had that you could maybe use as a means of payment if it weren't for their volatile price. And nowadays, we're more and more talking about other types of asset tokens, tokens that represents, as I said, commodities, securities, art, etc. But we have three other groups of tokens. We have a whole set of tokens that can, and we're not talking about that, mainstream is not talking about that yet too much. Tokens that represent kind of credentials and attribute tokens. Tokens could be used for managing your diplomas, certificates, licenses, passports, and other identity cards. On top of these identity-based tokens, we can build a set of applications that are access right tokens. Access right tokens very often are tied also to your unique identity, such as a ticket. A flight ticket needs to be issued based on your kind of passport or other ID. So ticket management, such as flight tickets, train tickets, concert tickets, can all be tokenized, with the advantage that these tokens are collectively managed and at much lower costs than is possible with regular computer systems today, and with much more transparency. Subscriptions, memberships could be examples for access right tokens, but also any type of sharing economy, car sharing, apartment sharing, bike sharing, scooter sharing. all that can be done also token-based. And this will be also interesting. Once we have these applications, it will be interesting what happens with all the sharing economy platforms of the Web 2, whether they will continue to exist in their current way. And the last example of the tokens, or last type of tokens, is I think the most interesting and the most disruptive, but it's also the one that is less talked about yet, are the incentive tokens, or what I also call purpose-driven tokens. Tokens that incentivize kind of action of a distributed network. And funny enough, Bitcoin is an asset token, but Bitcoin, the token, is also actually, and we will talk about that later, incentivizes contributions to collectively maintaining a blockchain network, and in this case, the Bitcoin network. So tokens can be used to incentivize collective computation, which is the case in a blockchain network as Bitcoin, but tokens can also be used for incentivizing social media contributions. We will have a look at the use case here, or incentivizing attention, paying for advertisement, or getting paid for watching advertisement. Or tokens can be used, and we will look at examples for incentivizing CO2 emission reduction. All right, I will go through the next few slides very quickly. The intention is not the intention is to give you an inspiration of the different use cases, but obviously, if you want to fully understand, if you're new to the topic, and if you want to fully understand, you would need more than an hour of a talk, which is one of the reasons I wrote my book. And you can read these examples in detail in my book, which is also available online for free, but Martin will tell you later more about that. Okay, so if you look at the different types of tokens, I think where we're currently at is this yellow one. The asset tokens are what I call the gateway drug to this new token economy. It's what we're starting out with. It's what we understand. We come in it, like we live in capitalist world, and it's all about ownership and private property and assets. And so we can easily tokenize that. And this is what we're currently doing. But I think as the years will pass, the most important and disruptive use case will be those of incentive tokens and purpose-driven tokens. And the things in the middle are kind of also quite important and disruptive, and they will happen along the way. If we fast forward into the future, I think that tokenization will disrupt mainly three areas. Banking and finance will be disrupted by all the types of asset tokens, which are the basis for what we call DeFi in the Web3, or decentralized finance. Smart contracts or applications that are automatically collectively managed by blockchain networks that collectively manage assets. So banking and finance, and we can see that in the recent kind of hype of decentralized finance, that asset tokens are clearly disrupting banking and finance. Purpose-driven tokens will very likely disrupt organizations, and we will look at why and how, because these purpose-driven tokens collectively steer in they can have the ability to steer collective action by incentivizing the individuals in a group to contribute to a collective goal. And we will have a look at that. So organizations will be disrupted, and identities and certifications will be disrupted with credential tokens, attribute tokens, and access right tokens. Okay, so going quickly through the different types of tokens. Asset tokens allow the creation of an asset token is a digital representative for any physical or virtual asset. And And this could introduce a range of new use cases that might not have been feasible before. These asset tokens are the next step in the automation of securities, asset markets, because they can replace entire back offices with smart contracts that are collectively managed by a Web3 network. Now, when we look at asset tokens, there are two different differentiations or groups. First of all, we can tokenize physical assets. So we don't actually token by physical asset. I mean that we're tokenizing the right to a physical asset. And this is not a new thing. We've had shares, paper shares, paper certificates representing shares of ownership of a company. What we're doing now is we're tokenizing this. And these paper shares were computerized in the last 2 decades. And what we're doing now, instead of central servers of banks that are privately manage these kind of entire back offices of security management, we can now tokenize this on a collective infrastructure and have trustful and transparent and compliant systems that can automatically much cheaper and faster conduct the transfer of assets, of these physical assets, whether it's a barrel of oil, whether it's a token that represents maybe an ounce of gold, or whether it's a token that represents a share in a small and medium priced company, or maybe a token that represents a piece of art. Tokens can also, or started out representing virtual assets. And the first token was the Bitcoin token. So it was a fully virtual asset that was represented by a token. And then we started using tokenization to represent also physical assets. So I think this is important to understand. And when we think about asset tokens, the other important kind of thing to understand is that we have asset tokens that are identical, have identical attributes, any type of currency, any type of virtual currency or fiat currency or commodity by nature has identical attributes. It doesn't matter where we own this coin or another coin, or this barrel of oil or another barrel of oil, the functionality is always the same. While it's not the same really the same asset, but the functionality is the same, and this is why they count as identical. They have identical attributes. But recently we heard a lot about so-called NFTs, non-fungible tokens, tokens that don't have identical attributes, tokens that have unique attributes, tokens that, for example, represent a piece of specific real estate, because the deed of an apartment that has 2 rooms and a lot of windows is not identical with the tokenized deed of an apartment that has 3 rooms and maybe not so much light because it's on the ground floor of an apartment building. So real estate can be also, the deeds to real estate ownership can be represented by tokens, collectively managed, and but obviously real estate ownership comes with, or real estate comes with unique attributes of size of apartment, or which floor the apartment is, etc., etc. All these unique attributes. The same is true for art. One Picasso painting is not the same as another Picasso painting. They are different, and so they can be represented by so-called non-fungible tokens. Non-fungible tokens allow us to represent, create unique attributes for assets. So security tokens can be regarded as NFTs, while most securities nowadays are fungible in nature. The programmability of tokens, because they're represented by a smart contract, you can create much more smarter securities where you have special voting rights, the management of special rights tied to a security is much easier than it was to manage, than it was easier in the analog world or even in the digital world today. So security tokens can become non-fungible when you attach more unique properties to the ownership of a specific asset. Tokenizing real estate is a very interesting use case, especially this requires, and we have a lot of lawyers also, I think, in the room, while technically it's easy to represent the kind of ownership of an apartment with a token. The question is whether the regulator allows you to tokenize this and trade these tokens or fractionalize kind of ownership over. For example, a real estate could be fractionalized and fractions of the tokens could be issued for either fundraising. So instead of going to the bank, you could ask your friends and family to invest in your house, and the smart contract, the tokenized the smart contract behind the token can periodically give them periodic fractional rent. And in the case of selling the house, periodic or this one-time kind of a selling fee, fractional selling fee. And I think these real estate tokens are a very good example for the different sets of rights that a token represents. If you would, for example, tokenize a piece of real estate and issue fractions of this piece of real estate to do, for example, fundraising. If you only have 50% of what you need to buy a specific house, you could issue fractional tokens for the rest of the other 50% and see if you find people who would co-invest in your apartment by acquiring these tokens. If you do that, obviously you only want to give them the rights of partial rent, fractional rent at the end of the month, and you want to give them the rights to transfer the ownership to someone else. What you don't want to give them is access right to your apartment. You don't want to give them the right to choose which furniture is in your apartment, and you don't want them to give the right to choose when to sell the apartment. So this is a very good example for how versatile kind of Web3 tokens are in creating, with a simple smart contract with a few lines of code, defining kind of micromanaging various types of rights that are attached to that token. So in the case, for example, of the co-ownership of a, let's say another type of real estate could be not a private home, but maybe a co-working space. Now, many co-working spaces are also co-owned by their members. In the case of a co-ownership of a co-working space, you would want voting rights attached maybe to the kind of members of that co-working space could have voting rights over how to manage that co-working space. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an overview of what you can do with tokens and the smart contracts behind those tokens. Tokenizing art is a very similar example for analog. You could tokenize analog art, create a digital representative for the Mona Lisa, and then maybe fractionalize it and have fractional ownership. But you can also digitalize, and we've seen that, for example, Instagram artists who created a unique digital Web3 signature of their Instagram art and sold that uniquely signed kind of Instagram picture for millions over Christie's or Sotheby's. And so this is a very interesting use case because you see that, especially in the digital world, in the Web 2, a digital file is equal, like you cannot distinguish between the original file and the copy of a file. This is how the kind of client-server internet works, because when you send an email with an attachment, or when you download kind of a picture from Facebook or from Instagram, you create a copy of that picture that you download. And it's not easy for us to distinguish the original from the copy. It's the same. with by signing, when the artists use their wallet to digitally sign kind of their Instagram picture, this signed Instagram picture becomes unique because it's the only, anyone can go to their Instagram page and see the Instagram photo, but only one person could acquire the signed kind of version. And for some people that has some value. I don't understand it, but some people think that a signed copy of an Instagram picture of the original artist is worth a lot of money, depending on the type of artist. We can certify diplomas using NFTs, etc., etc. Another type of asset tokens are payment tokens. Like tokenization started with cryptocurrencies, and cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, the idea was to have peer-to-peer electronic cash, to be able to conduct payments with them. The problem with Bitcoin was that while the Bitcoin was super revolutionary because it created a peer-to-peer payment network that was collectively managed, and it created a system, which we will see later, where the people who collectively manage this kind of network, they're incentivized with newly minted Bitcoin tokens for their kind of services to the system. But the problem, so that part was revolutionary. What Bitcoin missed out, the creators of Bitcoin forgot, is that for daily payments, you need a stable price. Because Bitcoin is very volatile in its price, we have had this kind of whole new phenomena of people trying to create so-called stable tokens. Tokens that can be used for payments that with different methods, and I can't go into the details now, generate a stable price, either because they're attached to an asset that has a stable value, such as a fiat currency or maybe a commodity with a relatively stable market value, or by using kind of central bank mechanisms that the central bank uses to create kind of algorithmic stability for a token by expanding the monetary base or shrinking the monetary base. And one of the biggest phenomena in the stable token movement now is like central banks themselves thinking about creating a digital euro, a digital USD, a digital version, or China is the first one to actually do it, the digital representation for the renminbi. So CBDC, central bank digital currencies, are a big thing now. Central banks have understood with Facebook's announcement that when Facebook announced that they wanted to create their own stable currency, central banks started to have FOMO and started to think about how to I think this was when most central banks understood that the Web3 is really happening. And if they don't hop on the Web3 train, if they don't tokenize kind of their currencies, then private companies such as Facebook or other stable token systems will even collectively managed stable token systems will take over. So this will be very interesting what's happening. And currently we're seeing that China has cracked down on crypto. This is not a surprise because China has been working on their own digital renminbi. So they don't want to have competition, I assume, for their digital currency. You're seeing what is happening now with Nicaragua announcing Bitcoin as an official means of payment. I think we will see interesting things happening over the next few months of countries that will be completely trying to crack down on crypto because they will lose control over the monetary base, and other countries trying to be very lenient about it. So yeah, this is a whole topic on its own, the monopoly of central banks for creating value and currencies. If you're interested to see which countries do what in the CBDC world, there is this online tool called cbdctracker.org, and you can track which countries are thinking about CBDCs and how far they are in their organization. I think this is a very good example tokenizing kilowatt hours. This is creating a digital representative for kilowatt hours. So it's easy when you have a digital meter that in your house, whenever the household has a wallet and the power plant has a Web3 wallet that uniquely identifies where kind of and how the electricity was produced. And the gas station has a crypto wallet, a blockchain wallet, and the car has a blockchain wallet, the electric car, and the people who drive those cars have mobile wallets. Then you can see that kilowatt hours of energy can be tokenized and settled and paid for over Web3 networks. And we can have the information about the provenance. Where does this energy come from? And kind of whether it's been produced in a power plant or a solar plant, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a very interesting use case. Data tokens, in our data economy, in a digital world, we're collecting more and more data, and this data is worth something. And what we can do is create kind of a market for trading data or offering data. And these data tokens, examples are the Ocean Protocol. They're building interesting application around like kind of business models, transparent business models of buying and selling data, much more transparent than what is happening, for example, in social media and in online advertising today, where we don't know what is happening with our data. I would like to kind of jump and fast forward to the incentive tokens. Tokens that I call also purpose-driven tokens that incentivize individual behavior to contribute to a collective goal or a public good. So what do I mean by that? The world today, if you remember, I said that tokens steer these purpose-driven tokens can disrupt organizations. If we look at how organizations work today, it doesn't matter what type of organization, whether it's your family, whether it's your school, whether it's a nation state or a company, we always have bigger or smaller formal or informal organizations that have some kind of top-down structure. And especially the formalized organizations, they're like kind of, they're registered, the company, the organization is registered somewhere, and you have one legal entity, and you have responsible managers, and you have legal contracts that offer kind of security to all members of this kind of organization that they will not be taken advantage of. For example, employment contracts make sure that whatever you discussed and agreed upon or when in the hiring process is also written down. And in the case that there is a breach of contract, then you try to settle it in front of a court of law. So you have security through contracts in the traditional kind of, in the world we know today, and we mostly have top-down organizations. What the Bitcoin network, why I think that the Bitcoin network is so revolutionary, and is because the Bitcoin network is the first truly decentralized and autonomous organization. And it's steered by a purpose-driven token, and this purpose-driven token is Bitcoin. And I think it's quite sad that the media keeps focusing on the asset kind of character of Bitcoin. And yes, Bitcoin is also can be used as a currency or as a commodity, a crypto commodity, but it's first and foremost a token that incentivizes the individuals of the Bitcoin network to contribute to a collective goal, and the collective goal of the Bitcoin network is to publicly or collectively maintain a public payment network. There is no bank behind it. There is no centralized institution running it. Transactions are managed by a mathematical algorithm, and security comes through cryptography. That's why we call it crypto economics, through cryptographic mathematical proofs. And when you can prove that you contributed to the network by by validating network transactions and creating a secure system and maintaining a secure payment network, you as the owner of a computer that contributes to that collective mining and validation of the system, you can get rewarded with newly minted tokens. Bitcoin tokens that are created the moment that you prove that you contributed work to that network. So individual action is rewarded with a network token. In the case of the Bitcoin network, it's the Bitcoin token. In the case of the Ethereum network, it's the Ethereum token. In the case of what we will see later, for example, the city of Vienna, where we were working on CO2 tokens, it's this Vienna token that incentivizes you for reducing CO2 emissions. We will look at it here. So we have no centralized legal entity. Security is completely mathematical based on cryptographic proofs. There is algorithmic enforcement of contracts. So if you don't comply, the compliance is not checked upon ex post, but like compliance happens on the fly. If you're not compliant with the system, the smart contract will not enforce a transfer of assets or will not give you kind of rewards if you cannot prove that you contributed to the system. So kind of the contracts or agreements are enforced algorithmically based on the computational constitution. And the tokens act as incentive for the contributions. I'm looking at the time. Can someone tell me how much more time we have so I don't go overboard?
Shermin,
yes.
10 more minutes. It's okay if it's okay with you.
Yes. Okay, so I'll try to be fast. And so we have all kinds of incentive kind of tokens. As I said, it started out, these purpose-driven tokens started out with Bitcoin and other blockchain tokens that incentivize distributed consensus among an untrusted network of actors. Proof of work, this very kind of computationally intense mechanism in Bitcoin, which is criticized for being using a lot of energy, has a certain function for keeping the network also safe. But there are alternative kind of consensus protocols that are being worked on, proof of stake, proof of importance, et cetera, that are trying to be more energy efficient. But we're really in a very, very early stage of this crypto economics of figuring out how we can combine cryptography with economic incentive mechanisms to positively incentivize people to do the right thing in the network. But we can also use kind of this principle of incentivizing people with a network token for social media. And I think Steemit is a very good example. Steemit is a social network. It's completely decentralized application that runs on a blockchain network, and it's been operational for 6 years. Unfortunately, Steemit has many flaws in its kind of token design. But for a while, Steemit was super popular, especially in 2015 and 16. It had over 1 million active users. I personally know people who were Steemit contributors. Steemit is like Facebook or Twitter. Anyone can upload a post and people can like it, right? And if you upload a post and somebody likes it, you and the person who liked it get rewarded with Steemit tokens in proportion to the importance of the person in that network. Now, this incentive mechanism is very interesting because it completely disrupts social media as we know it. First of all, the social media network is collectively managed by a Web3 infrastructure. And on an application level, people who contribute content to the network get rewarded with Steemit tokens. And this is not fiction, this is reality. And for a while, I knew 2 people in 2015 and 16, or 16 and 17, who made so much Steemit tokens with contributing to the social network that they could pay part of the rent with their income on the Steemit network. So this is reality. And even Reddit, a Web2-based social network, has started, some subreddits have started to tokenize their subreddits. So last year. So it's very interesting to see not only like completely like new Web3 networks trying to reinvent social media by incentivizing social media contributions with a network token, but even established companies such as social media companies from the Web2 are now moving into the Web3. So, and tokenizing their contributions. And I think that's very interesting. I have a whole chapter on my book on Steemit if you're interested. I think it's a fascinating, while Steemit itself will die out, I'm quite sure, but the concept is fascinating, and some other decentralized social network will take over for sure. I would like to spend the last few minutes before I round up talking about the CO2 tokens. So we can use kind of tokens to incentivize people if they prove that they created safe CO2 emission reductions. We could incentivize them with a token. In specific, when I was working with the Vienna University of Economics, and we created this research lab, one of the projects we had was the screenshot below with the city of Vienna, Stadt Wien. The city of Vienna said that they want to create kind of token-based understand how they can use tokens to reward citizens for more kind of citizen activity in the city. And so we came up with the idea that we use an app on your mobile phone that can, if you download it, it could track your mobility behavior. It could measure whether you took the car or whether you took the bike or walked. And then there is public data on how your mobility behavior, if you don't take the car, if you walk or take the bike, how much CO2 emission you save. And for every kind of 20 kilogram of CO2 emission reduction, you would get rewarded with a token. And so designing this system was a complex thing, like from an economic and behavioral economics perspective, wasn't easy, because you need to incentivize, you need to mind so many different questions, legal questions, economic questions, behavioral economic questions. So this thing became reality and is now in a test phase being deployed by the city of Vienna. So, and partner institutions such as theaters are part of it, and if you, with a token, you can get a voucher in the app store of this decentralized application and maybe get a ticket to a theater, and the theaters give these tickets for free because they also want to incentivize CO2 emission reduction. So this is one of many, many examples of how we could use tokenization to reflect value, collective value for society. If we as a society say, or if the city of Vienna says that we want to incentivize our citizens to reduce CO2 emission reductions, they could use tokens, tokenized rewards that are publicly managed to do that, to create kind of regional currencies or regional economies or regional value creation networks. And my next book, in fact, will focus on those purpose tokens with a focus on CO2 tokens. That's a whole probably 10 sessions where we could talk about these types of tokens. I'm just going to mention it. Attention tokens can really reinvent online advertising, but I can't say more about that just because we don't have so much time. As I told you before, we have decentralized finance, which is becoming a big thing. Basically, everything that we used to call, like in finance, we used to call different markets for commodities, money, derivatives, foreign exchange, futures market, interbanking markets. When Bitcoin came, we said, oh, there is this new asset class called the crypto market. But if we think about tokenizing everything, tokenizing commodities, money, assets, etc., really, this is where we're moving into. Like we can, in the future, tokenize everything, or gradually tokenize every real and digital asset, and even kind of reputation tokens and credentials and attributes. And in these pink kind of circles, you will see all the tokens that are transferable and that can be traded. They can have a market. And you will have some tokens with limited transferability that might be tied to more your reputation, your identity, etc. It doesn't make sense to transfer your ID card to someone else. There is no market for that. But any transferable asset can be tokenized, and everything will be a crypto market in the future, once we get there. But there are many technical and especially legal obstacles and network effects until we get there. But once we get there, I think the dynamics, our definition of what is a financial, what is a financial market, what is the real economy, and what is money will merge. If we can have a digital representative for every apple, every pear, and we can have wallet to wallet swapping of these tokens, and the algorithm will determine the price of the swap, we might not need money as we know it today anymore. We just need a wallet where we can determine our unit of account. If I want to use Apple tokens as my unit of account, then I can do that instead of using the euro, or if I want to use Bitcoin as my unit of account. But I can we can enter this digital barter economy where everything is tokenized and everything that's transferable can be traded, can be swapped wallet to wallet without needing centralized institutions the way we have it today. So while we're not there yet, we're not too far from it either. Things are unfolding very, very fast. I will fast forward, skip these things, and close with these last few slides. One of the hardest things for us today is to, we're at a very similar point like in the early 1990s. In the early 1990s, when HTML became a thing and it was easy to create a new kind of a website with a few lines of code, we could create a website, but we didn't know what to write on the website. What do I do with my website? And we're at a very similar stage now. It's easy to create a token with a few lines of code of a smart contract. But how? What's the functionality of my token? What is the purpose of my token? What are the legal, economic, ethical, technical aspects of creating that token? And so there is this whole new studies or kind of a research area of token engineering and crypto economics emerging. And these four pillars are the most important aspects of how to design your token from a technical perspective. We have very different sets of questions: security questions, scalability questions, privacy questions. Which infrastructure do we want to use? What token standard from a technical point of view do we want to use? But then we have the legal questions. How do we make kind of, is this token we want to create legally compliant? Am I allowed to do what is technically possible and economically feasible? Right. So the legal questions are very relevant, and there is this techno-legal questions and the intersection of technical, legal, and economic questions are very important. So tokenizing assets and access rights is quite easy and straightforward because we understand how the assets, such as securities, work, right? We understand the dynamics of securities markets. We understand the dynamics of real estate markets. So the questions are: what is the relevant regulation? What is the relevant jurisdiction? How do I need to adapt the regulation, et cetera, et cetera? So for asset tokens, legal questions are very dominant. But for purpose-driven tokens, we have this whole new area of economic engineering. When I kind of steer a distributed social media network with a reputation token that incentivizes contributions to the social network, I need to design it in a way that it cannot be, that it is meaningful, kind of the reputation token is a meaningful indicator for relevant content contribution, and that it cannot be gamified. And this School of Economic Engineering is on the intersection of economics, network system science, cyber-physical systems, many questions related to behavioral economics, to macroeconomics, microeconomics, etc. And we don't have that know-how yet, because most people who study economics were set out to study economics either to teach at university or to kind of help the government steer their economic system, but they weren't set out to help distribute Bitcoin to steer their economic network. So we need completely new classes and very new education. We need new kind of roles for these creating these Web3 networks. Doesn't only require technical knowledge, it also requires economic engineering, especially in the context of purpose-driven networks. Obviously, always the legal questions. Is it legally possible or compliant to do that? Or am I creating a legally incompliant system? And then we have the questions around ethical engineering, the questions of transparency versus privacy, the trade-off between what should be public, what should be private. This is not a new discussion. In political science, we've had that forever. So we need to have these discussions in the Web3 where so much information is transparent and public. And we need, and this is a very important question, the question of power structures, the trade-off between decentralization and who has power in the network. And unfortunately, in these blockchain networks, based on the a lot of the time, your kind of network power is a function of the amount of tokens that you own in the system, the amount of money you have in the system, and whether that's an egalitarian approach is discussable, right? So we have a lot of questions here when designing these decentralized networks on the intersection of political science, ethics, sociology, etc. So many questions that need to be resolved when we create a token system. But mostly you need to define your purpose. What's the purpose of your specific token system? Then you derive the properties a token can have. Is it transferable? Is it not transferable? Does it expire after a certain time or not? Is it fungible? Is it non-fungible? What security, what privacy aspects does it need to have, etc., etc. Then you need to check the implications of the properties of your token design with the different domain experts. And then you need to simulate your economic model, especially with these purpose-driven tokens. You need to simulate it and see what happens over time. Otherwise, your system might fail, as is the case, for example, in the Steemit network, where the idea was magnificent. They even had many users, but the token, the main purpose token, the reputation token, had many design flaws that people stopped using the system because late adopters in the network didn't have a chance to make enough money. So without further ado, to close this, this is why 3 years ago we created the Crypto Economics Research Lab in Vienna. I'm not working there anymore. But as you can see, it was an interdisciplinary research institute of many people from our university, with some people who were working there full time and some people who were kind of affiliates that shared, where we shared knowledge and did events and knowledge exchange, because this is a token economy based on crypto economics. This is a whole new discipline, and we need to understand that not only do we need to research this, and we need to start teaching the aspects at the university. So yes, there is much more to say. I have written a lot in my book. I hope it can be some food for thought for those who have time to read it. And if we have time, I know we're way overhead time. I have time, so whoever wants to ask questions in Spanish, I understand. Please feel free.
Shermin, thanks a lot for your time and your amazing clarity on these new subjects. And we have some questions for you, but before that, we would like to do some announcements. The first one is that there is a Spanish version of Token Economy, the second edition. It's on GitHub. On the chat, you can find the link, the relevant link to a Web2 platform. And we are working together with Shermin to print a printed version of this book with the university. Expect some news in the next couple of weeks. Having said that, let's go to some questions that we have. Janina Acosta made some really interesting questions. I will state it to you, Shermin. The first one is, what do you think states should do regarding the regulation of blockchain technology? That's a big question, and it was also my question, linked to the use of cryptography for commercial and civil uses. And I don't know if this huge innovation may be jeopardized by having the improper laws in place, like forbidding the use of cryptography. That's a big question.
Yes. I mean, cryptography is a whole, like forbidding cryptography is a problem on so many levels, not only for the Web3. It is a human rights question, right? In the data-driven world, we need cryptography. It represents the right to privacy of communication, which we have in democratic countries guaranteed on some level of nation state. Some countries even have it in their constitution, the right to the secrecy of communication. So obviously in the internet era, the right to cryptographic, the cryptography should be a human right. Unfortunately, we have been seeing, especially post 9/11, that countries such as the USA started to use kind of demonized cryptography through the backdoor of their anti-terror legislation. And countries, even like the country I come from in Austria, adapted very similar laws. That led to the fact that, for example, in Austria in 2009, a set of animal rights activists were detained under the anti-terror paragraph. They were detained for over a year without knowing what their charges were because they had used cryptographic means of communication. So this happened in a so-called democratic country. I find that highly problematic. Not even talking about the Web3, obviously, the right to cryptography is very important. However, this is a legal and an ethical question of this privacy versus transparency. Obviously, there is the right to privacy, but then there is also the right to the public safety. So how do you decide over that? Because in an analog world, you would use the judge, right? The judge could decide to give the power of searching your house, etc. But now you cannot do that. So yes, this is a whole set of questions where we could have a whole conference only on that topic.
Definitely, it's such a big question that needs to be answered. But before that, we need to do some research, multidisciplinary research, to find the proper answer. There is another question from Janina. I think it's it's a bigger question. What do you think about replacing fiat currencies for CBDCs? And I
mean, I don't know. There is no need to replace the fiat currency. I think it's just a new form of money. It's like kind of maybe the M5. You have bank money, you have paper money, and CBDC is just a cryptographic representation of that fiat currency. So this will happen gradually over time. I think central banks currently are struggling a lot because they know they have to do it. But this has massive implications on the whole banking system also, where actually private banks could lose their role. But again, this is a whole topic on its own. I think for whoever is interested in the topic of CBDCs, the IMF has written very, very good papers on that already years ago, and more and more central banks are issuing papers. The Central Bank of England, you can read what they've been writing. The European Central Bank is writing more and more confusing things. about it, you can see that this is where you see that intelligent people, like, you know, who should know better, the system, they cannot jeopardize their own system. So I think the topic of CBDCs and the potential banning of cryptocurrencies, we will see this unfolding over the next months and probably years. There will be a battle. You know, I don't think we will, but I don't think we will lose fiat currencies. There's too much, you know, gravitas around them and momentum, but there will be so much alternative currencies, and the central banks will simply lose the monopoly over creating money, simply, right? And this could be super scary when people flee, put the money out of fiat into crypto. This is where it might get banned, but in the long term, they can't stop it. Yeah, and because of fractionalization, I think of the nation states, it won't be possible. But in the short term, it can get ugly.
Yes, yes. We have two more questions. One relates to advertisement on social networks, and if you believe that tokenizing social networks could be a way to contribute to a solution to the privacy issue of what they do with our data and who are they selling it to?
Yeah, if you're interested in advertising and tokenizing attention, I think, unfortunately, where I didn't have time to go deep dive into that example is on, for example, what the Basic Attention Project, but also similar projects are doing. The Basic Attention Project is, so there is also a whole chapter in the book on that. And they work with a privacy preserving browser that also comes with a wallet, a Web3 wallet. And in theory, like, all your data is kind of, you can get targeted advertising, but the data shouldn't leave kind of your wallet or your private identity hub where your data is managed. But kind of the big data runs in the contained space of your wallet, and you get delivered those ads, but the data never leaves your system if it's correctly designed.
Yes, yes. And the last one, what's your thought about quantum computing and cryptography that wasn't built to resist quantum computing because it's, I don't know, Bitcoin, for example?
It's not entirely true, because Bitcoin, for example, works with, because of that potential threat, with two different mechanisms. What these blockchain networks do, they have two different cryptographic algorithms they work with. So if one algorithm gets hacked, the other one will still keep the network safe. So it's very similar to using multiple and different types of locks on your bike, right? So if you only have one lock on your bike, the likelihood of stealing it is much higher than if you have 2 or 3 locks on your bike and of different systems. It just takes the hacker way longer. These networks do account for the fact that computers are getting more and more powerful, and cryptography, I'm not a cryptographer, so from my high level understanding, it's an arms race, you know. So, but it's by nature an arms race. So those people designing the cryptography are aware of it, and if you, which is why it's very important, from what I understand, that you use proven cryptographic algorithms and don't do makeshift algorithms that haven't been proven or tested yet. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Okay, Shermin, in name of the Catholic University of Córdoba, we want to thank you in the name of the alumni team, Leticia, Paola, and Martin, of course, for having you here. It's amazing the clarity that you have on these complex multidisciplinary subjects. Thank you very much for joining us on this.
Thank you for the invitation, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye, Shermin.
Bye.
Shermin, un último comentario, agradecer también a vos, Eva, y el padre rector estuvo en gran parte de tu exposición, se tuvo que retirar porque tenía otra reunión, y nos dejó encargado agradecerte por tu pasión y por la claridad con la que has expuesto el tema.
Gracias.
También decirte que ha sido para él muy inspirador todo lo que has dicho de cara a una mejor economía mundial, entonces eso también le pareció importante, y que tenés por cierto que te has ganado un admirador más en su persona. Así que te traslado estas palabras que nos ha dejado para decirte. Muchas gracias y de verdad encantados de escucharte, Shermin.
Gracias a ustedes y hasta pronto, ¿no?
Hasta pronto. Sí, sí.
Muchas gracias a todos por acompañarnos.
Leti, Pau, gracias por este espacio y espero que haya sido una experiencia motivadora, porque creo que cuando uno ve lo que se está armando y se está viniendo, realmente quiere entender un poco más. Y es difícil ver tanta claridad en tan poco tiempo para tocar temas tan complejos.
Seguro, seguro. Muchísimas gracias a todos los que nos acompañaron y desde ya a disposición para hacer cosas en conjunto o aceptar ideas que quieran traer o nuevos temas a escuchar. Muy buenas tardes a todos.
Y feliz cumpleaños a la universidad.
Ah, tal cual. Sí, gracias.
Gracias.
Hasta luego.
Gracias a todos.
Chau, chau.
Chao.